Welcome back to another episode of Answering Religious Error. We come to you every Tuesday night right here on your Facebook page or your YouTube channel. And we're thankful that you have tuned in this evening to hear another study from God's Word as we address certain aspects of keeping our heads on straight. And that deals with a lot of various topics we've covered over the past few months and things that we think about, our relationship with God, the things that affect us in our daily lives. And we'll be talking tonight about being a busybody. And so we're going to save some of our other announcements for the rest of the week until the end of our program, especially about our Q&A tomorrow. So stay tuned for that so you can hear the details of how to reach us tomorrow. But tonight, we'd like for you to listen in. If you have any questions that pop up that we can answer on our Q&A program tomorrow, just email us at questions@answeringreligiouserror.com. Or if you're watching our Facebook page, you can post a message over on the side. And who knows, we might sneak your comment into our discussion this evening. But we are thankful that you have tuned in tonight. And I would just start by asking that, do you know what goes on in the lives of your neighbors around you? Are you one that goes into the church building and looks across the room and wonder what brother so-and-so and sister so-and-so has been doing all week? How much do you involve yourself in the lives of other people? And what exactly do you need to know about them? What do you need to know for their good, or what do you need to know for your own benefit? And when we think about being a busybody, let's just go ahead and quote a passage tonight, and that's taken from 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 15. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, a thief, an evildoer, or as a busybody in other people's matters. Let's bring up our panel tonight and let's introduce the men that'll be discussing this topic with me. Brother Bob Myhan's next to me. Brother Terry Benton is right below me, and Brother Stephen McCrary. Brethren, it's good to be with you tonight. Just introduce yourself, tell a little bit about where you are, and whether or not you are opposed or whether you are for being a busybody.
My name is Bob Myhan. I'm in Macon, Georgia, and I've been here for 23 years, I believe. And yes, I am bitterly opposed to being a busybody. That's why I try not to body busies or busybodies. Try to keep myself too busy to be a busybody.
I guess what we have to describe is what are we busy with? And there
Yeah,
are some things we need to get busy doing.
yeah.
What do you think, Terry?
Excuse me. I don't care to be in anybody else's business but mine, unless they need me to be, and they'll ask me. And I think that's the way to go. I'm here in Columbia, South Carolina, at the Airport Church of Christ, and you can visit us on our website at www.airport-church-of-christ.com. Put a dash between each of those letters and have us visit us and on that website. And if you're in our area, feel free to come by. We'd love to have you.
All right. I'm willing to say that if you just do a Google search of Airport Church of Christ in that area, it'll probably pop right up. So sometimes those addresses can get a little tricky. Stephen, good to have you with us.
Yeah, good to be here. I work with Golden Springs Church of Christ in Anniston, Alabama. I live in Oxford, Alabama. And just, to be totally clear here, I've got a cat down here that likes to jump up on the desk. So, I don't want anybody being a busybody about my affairs and wonder about what's that animal that jumped up on that desk. That will be a cat. So just to clear that up and make sure that people aren't going to be, worried about that.
And we know cats are notorious for being busybodies, or they just don't care. But it's good to be with you all. I'm Chris Kramer. I'm up in the Kentucky, Tennessee area. I preach for the Northside Church of Christ in Russellville, Kentucky. And you can see that we are from all areas. Of course, most of us here today are a little bit more on the eastern side of the United States, but we know brethren all over the place. So if you're listening to us from wherever, we can have studies online. We can get you in touch with brethren that are in your area. So again, email us at questions@answeringreligious.com. And let me say that again, questions@answeringreligiouserror.com. And we would be happy to set you up with some folks, brethren in your area, because it's important that we apply these lessons to our lives. that we grow closer in our relationship with God. Well, of course, I'm filling in for Brian Garlock tonight. He's still on the tail end of recovering from some problems with his voice for the past few weeks. He's working behind the scenes, and so we really appreciate his work and effort. Can't wait to see him here on Answering Religious Error again very soon. But based on some things, as we posted these videos and the descriptions of them online, normally Mark Dunnigan would kind of take lead on these studies as he's designed many of these questions based upon what he sees going on in our society and in the world, what he sees going on in the church, and then of course he and Brother Brian discussed these matters and have put together a real nice program for us. So we're just kind of stepping into their shoes this evening, and they say it takes great discretion to know the difference between being my brother's keeper. I'm sure we're familiar with that term from what Cain famously said in his excuse to God as to his relationship with his brother. But it's an opposition of being what the scriptures also call a troublesome meddler. The passage I read a few moments ago from the New King James Version used the term busybody, which we're familiar with in our society today. But the term meddler, it really shows, and I think puts on a little bit more of a distinct problem with this issue of sticking our nose into places that it shouldn't be. And so, what's our business? What's not our business? We'll look at some passages tonight and share some thoughts with you. And so, we'll begin by bringing up our first point and uh, asking some questions this evening. What is a meddler? What's the difference between getting involved in the lives of others to help them? And we'll look at Matthew chapter 18 and verse 15 and Galatians 6 and verse 1. Being my brother's keeper and the sin known as being a busybody. How do we watch out for one another? How do we inquire about one another? How do we show concern and love for one another without getting into each other's business? Is it even possible? And where do we draw the line? And we're going to see that a lot of people sometimes will take offense, even when you come to them in a great attitude of love and concern for their lives. Sometimes it's just one of those first defenses that people throw up that they want to accuse you of meddling. And so let's talk about that, brethren. What are your thoughts this evening?
Well, I'll start out with some thoughts here. I'm looking at a passage in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and look at verse 12, where he says, having condemnation because they have cast off their first faith. They have condemnation because they've cast off their first faith. And besides, they learn to be idle. So here's a facet of our problem here, is idleness. And then he says, wandering about from house to house. Well, because they got too much time on their hands. And so they wander from house to house, and not only idle, but also gossips. So they're looking for stories to tell. They're looking for anything that will make a good, juicy story. So they're idle. They're not busy enough in the Lord's work. They're not busy enough with their own affairs. And so they're wanting to nose into other people's, so they'll have something to tell. Gossips and busybodies, saying things which they ought not. Saying things. That's so you got these the word busybody right between gossips and saying things that they ought not. There are a lot of things that we just don't need to talk about. We don't need to talk about other people, especially by way of transferring information that others don't need to know. Now, if somebody is sick, you find out about it and can share that information that they need to be some care taken. Well, that's different. You're not being a busybody. You're showing concern. Now, of course, your first step should be to find out from them personally what they want you to know about it, and if they want you to know about it, and then if they want you to share it. So you're going to them because you've heard that they're sick. Well, that's different. That's care. That's love. That's concern. and you're not trying to spread information about somebody that they don't want spread about them. So a busybody is somebody that busies himself in other people's matters. They're meddling in other people's matters. And that's the difference between getting involved in the life of someone to help them versus, just going around trying to find some juicy gossip to tell, something to tell on somebody. So I think that's why Peter and Paul both put it in a grouping of things like murdering and thief. You steal from somebody, evildoers. Why? Because you're stealing somebody's privacy. You're stealing that. You're also hurting them. That's a form of murder. So there are lots of reasons that we could look at just these two texts, and we could see that God groups them together, and we ought to be very, very, very concerned that we don't get ourselves involved in something like that. That God says that's in the grouping of things that I said Christians ought not to be involved in. So those are just some of my introductory thoughts on what is the meaning of a meddler. Is somebody getting into areas that don't belong to them. You handle your issues, bear your own burdens, and if somebody wants some help on something, fine. But you're not to search out and find out what you can find out on people so you can tell a story on them, tell some juicy gossip, or because it strokes your ego that you found out something and you want to share it, regardless of whether that person wants you sharing that or not. So that's a busybody.
Not taking away from anything from what Terry said, because those are good comments. I just want to talk a little bit about the context there of the passage that he quoted. Here he's talking about the widows that the church where Timothy was supporting. And he says back in verse 9, do not let a woman under 60 years old be taken into the number, and not unless she has been the wife of one man, well reported of for good works, if she has brought up children, if she has lodged strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, if she has diligently followed every good work. That's the kind of woman, the kind of widow that the church needs to support. And from other passages, she needs to be one who is truly in need, has nobody else to care for her. Then in verse 11, but refuse the younger widows. That is, don't take these younger widows into the number to be fully supported. For when they have begun to grow wanton against Christ, they desire to marry, having condemnation because they have cast off their first faith. And besides, they learn to be idle, etc. And so if the church supports young women, young widows who do not have the experience of the older women and do not have the characteristics and the things necessary in their abilities to be a fruitful worker for the Lord, then she's not to be supported. And he goes on to say that in verse 14, therefore I desire that the younger widows marry. Just go ahead and encourage them to marry. Again, in the first century, women, it was very difficult for them to support themselves. Generally, they needed to be married. There were exceptions, such as Lydia in Acts chapter 16, who was from Thyatira. She apparently was self-supporting and even had a household that she was caring for. But rather than support these widows and enable them in their going from house to house and saying things which they ought not to say, gossiping and being busybodies, etc., that's just, it's wrong for them to do it, and it's wrong for the church to enable them to do it. And like Terry said, we ought to certainly be concerned about people. If we see somebody struggling, certainly we should inquire, see if there's anything we can do for them, but not pump them for information for dissemination. If they have a need that we can't meet, but we know somebody that can, ask them if they have enough confidence in you to trust you to mention it to the right kind of people who will not spread it abroad, but who will come to them and help. And so we need to show concern, yes, but we don't need to dig deep into somebody's background and find out all we can so that we can disseminate that.
You know, the other thing to think about here is how much in the scriptures we are encouraged to think from an individual level, if that makes sense. When you do go to Matthew 18:15, it is really interesting that you read through that passage and you recognize that, first of all, verse 15 tells me, if I have a problem with my brother, I better go to that brother. I'm sure that most evangelists have gotten that phone call with someone talking about something that somebody else did in the congregation, and hopefully what we all will typically say is, well, sounds like you need to talk with him and get that figured out with him. And that's really not always the answer people are expecting, which sometimes tells you sort of the depth of their Bible knowledge, maybe. But in verse 15, tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you've gained your brother. And I'm stealing this point from Ed Bragwell, but I thought he made it so well when he pointed this out. The church isn't yet involved in verse 15. And then in verse 16, he says, well, if he's not here, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of two or three witnesses every word may be established. Well, I would still argue that the church is still not involved at that point. You have two or more individuals involved in that moment. And then verse 17, if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. What's fascinating about this passage is we get no instruction whatsoever on what the church as a collective is supposed to do about this. This is all about what the individual does in response to an offense that this other brother or sister has done toward you. So we need to be thinking at the same time, we need to be thinking on an individual level, and we also need to be thinking on a collective level, which, Galatians 6 deals with. You who are spiritual, restore such one in spirit of gentleness. It does deal with that collective aspect in verse 2 as well. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. But even then, we recognize that it is upon the individual to help each other out. So we've got to be able to look at this not just as this is just about me getting what I want. This is about acting in such a way that you're benefiting this brother or sister, and at the same time recognizing that our membership in this collective of the local congregation, that's important. And our membership in the universal church, that's important. And that needs to be considered in the light of all these things. And so when I do have a brother who's legitimately offended me and there's a problem there, part of what I'm going to say to him is, you got to think about what this does to the church and what happens here. That's a legitimate outreach, but it's not a legitimate outreach when I'm taking something that I don't really like about this person, or maybe he's just not doing things the way that I would like them to do. And I'm going to just more or less start a campaign. I'm going to talk to everybody but him about this problem. Well, that's not what the scriptures teach. And at that point, you have become a gossip. You have become a busybody. And a lot of people go on crusades that they think in their minds this is necessary, when really all they're doing is tearing a brother or sister down.
Excellent points. And they touch into every area of many of our questions tonight. This idea of being a troublesome meddler certainly isn't unwelcome, nor is it invited for people to be, sticking their nose in your business, as I'll probably say several times tonight. But these people that won't mind their own business are looking to, judge the affairs of others. It's almost like Jesus dealt with this on a constant basis. People were just waiting for him to mess up and just keeping an eye out so they could find something to accuse him of. And so these meddlers really look to hurt others by their meddling. And maybe it doesn't always start that way, but if you get wind that somebody did something or whatever, and like you said, Stephen, it kind of makes its way around a group of people before it gets back to the person in question. And you might find out they never did anything wrong to begin with, or you might find out that they're very willing and receptive to rebuke out of love. And so, where's the understanding? Where's the forgiveness? And that's the difference between being a meddler, a busybody, and having a genuine concern for someone. When you start to see the telltale signs in their lives that maybe there is sin here, it may start with little things like lack of attendance, but it's also a sign of a bigger problem. And if it's something that you do, something that you're concerned about, that maybe you're giving the wrong impression to the brethren, let them know what's going on. If you can't make it to service, let them know why. Kind of get ahead of the problem, before it becomes a bigger problem. So there are a lot of preventative measures that I think people can take to overcome not only the nosiness of a busybody, but also just to make sure that no rumors begin and people fall into that really, I don't want to call it an innocent trap, but it is something that people do fall into very accidentally and easily. You get a call from somebody about somebody, and the next thing you're panicking. What do I do? What do I say? It's easy to say, go to that brother. But then at the same time, that brother's not answering your phone calls. How do you deal with that? So we need to keep busy working. We need to keep busy with the affairs of our own lives, of our own house. And you have to ask yourself, okay, am I willing to watch out for the souls of others? Now, granted, that term is used in regard to the eldership and their oversight of the work, but I want to just kind of put this out there that as a Christian, with Christian families, and I'm talking about the church here, the love that we share with one another. Why can't my business be your business? Um, our lives in some ways need to be an open book. Now, I don't want people go sticking their noses into my bank account, and things like that. And I'm not going to hand my social security number out to everybody that's out there. I don't answer those goofy questions on Facebook that ask you what's your favorite color and your favorite number. Uh, you know, People try to figure out stuff about you. Now, that's just common sense. But otherwise, why not track me? Why not watch me? Let me be accountable to you. You be accountable to me. We'll watch out for each other. We'll watch each other's backs, is what we're talking about here on the positive side of this. And that's what being your brother's keeper is all about: checking on you, caring for you, providing for you when necessary. Even the scriptures teach us that we need to provide for our own households in the context of some of these passages. But 2 Thessalonians 3 and verse 11 comes to mind when it says, "For we hear that there are some who walk among you in a disorderly manner, not working at all, but are busybodies." What is that disorderly manner? It's one thing to be accused of being busybody, but what leads up to that? What's a preventative measure that I can take? And you'll find that if somebody is prone to gossip, they usually have the biggest mouth and they're looking for the biggest pair of ears. And the problem with that is if they're talking to you about somebody else, I guarantee you they're talking to someone else about you. It's a terrible habit. It's an addiction for some people. And in the passages that deal with the wanton woman who has not applied herself to getting busy and being like the woman of Proverbs chapter 31, it's easy to fall into that trap when you don't have anything else to do, when you don't apply your life, especially to godly matters, and then you just find yourself curious about what everyone else is doing. And that's a danger. That's a danger. And we need to be willing to be an open book to people's lives, but you're going to build relationships with people in order to have that. You're going to build trust, is what we're getting at here. And so another passage that comes to mind is Proverbs 25, verse 17, that basically says, don't bother your neighbor too much. He will become weary of you. Don't wear out your welcome. And so don't always be there to poke your nose into everybody's business. You don't need to look around their house to see what they're doing and what they have in the fridge and what's on the walls and in the medicine cabinet. We don't need to be snoops like that. And just quite frankly, busybodies can be a little creepy. Let's go on to our next question. Um, why is it, uh, Why is being a busybody put on the same list as murderers? Is it really that bad? Terry kind of touched on this just a few moments ago, and I'll just go ahead and lead us off in this thought. And that, you know, when you are meddling in other people's business, they will feel attacked. Um, it may not be as bad as murder as people might say. Years ago, someone broke into my home, and yeah, they stole a few things. Broken VCR, so good luck with that. Um, Things that just could be replaced. But what bothered me the most is that somebody had invaded my space, that somebody had tracked muddy footprints through my house and over the top of my bed. And sleeping that night was a little difficult knowing that someone's presence was there. And I was very bothered by that. And what does that have to do with busybody? Well, that's just people being in your space, people being in your business. And I felt attacked. And that's, that's a prelude to your very life feeling threatened. What if I had been there? What if I had been unaware? Was this person armed? These are things that do lead to bigger and worse problems. But is some part of their lives, their privacy taken from them? That's why it's this seriousness, even compared to murdering and all of the other problems that we read about in First Peter 4 and verse 14. And really, it comes down to this one important answer, is that God said it was wrong. That's what we need to get out of our head before most. Everything else is just reasoning it and making comparisons to all the other things that are bad. Why throw it in this list? Because God deemed it necessary. And he sees that it is a problem that tears people apart. And what is God's church about? It's about unity and the fellowship that we have in Jesus Christ. And meddling will tear that unity apart, and God hates division. What are some of your other thoughts, brothers?
Well, Jesus talked about that, about murder. He says, you've heard it said, you shall not murder. And then he went on to say, but have you thought about this, about assassinating somebody's character with words? So you can assassinate somebody's character, and that's the same thing as murdering. Maybe not in physical effect, of course, but nevertheless, how is assassinating somebody's character not murder? So it is not equivalent in every way, but it is. There are some similarities, and Jesus pointed that out. So if you're willing to do this, but not that, you're no better. You're not better than somebody else. And then he goes on to talk about in Matthew 7:12, he says, do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. Well, would you have somebody to be a busybody and talk about you? Then you don't do it to them. Because that's hurtful. That's hurting them. You may be hurting them with misinformation. Maybe it's a perception matter that you are now carrying that perception and murdering them behind the scenes with it, or assassinating their character with that misinformation. And so it's like the passage that was read a while ago in Matthew 18. If it's something between you and them, go to them and talk to them between you and them. And with the ultimate goal, I think this needs to be emphasized in every case, it is with the goal of winning them, not pushing them away, not destroying them, not hurting them, not because you don't like them and I want to get at them. I want to hurt them back because I feel like they've hurt me. You've got to approach it from the standpoint of Jesus. And Jesus says, you've got to look at everything through the premise of love being the highest of all principles. Love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself. Those two things, he says, everything else is going to hang on those. So you filter everything through the filter of, is this loving to God, and is this loving to my neighbor? And if you can't answer positively on both of those cases, then you don't need to say it. You don't need to do it, whatever it is. Now, in the Matthew 18 case, it was that you have gained your brother. That's the ultimate goal of love, is to gain your brother. If you're trying to hurt them, you're not trying to win them, you're not trying to gain them. And that's the opposite of what Jesus was telling us to do there. And the same with that Galatians 6, you've considered yourself, lest you also be tempted. That's what you're doing. If I'm in that position, would I want somebody to pick me up this way? And if not, then maybe I don't care enough for them like I should. Maybe I don't love them. And if I don't love them, am I going to go to heaven? If I don't love my neighbor, if I don't love God enough to approach them with the desire to win them, am I going to go to heaven? The answer is no, because these are the principles that ought to be foremost in our mind in what we're going to do about busying ourselves with somebody else's matters, and what we're going to say about it to hurt them behind the scenes. So keep in mind the principle of, is that what you would want done to you? So turn it around, make sure this is what you would want to do if you were in that position. And if it's not, then drop it. Don't deal with it. Don't say anything about it. Keep your thoughts to yourself, and then try to get your thoughts on better things. Those are some of my thoughts.
On the seriousness of this, I think it's important for us to just take a step back and think about, okay, when you watch a TV show or a movie, and there's a character who's very religious, who comes up and is portrayed as someone who is just really strict with their religion, and they are the busybody in that movie, TV show, whatever you want to say it. And they're getting all up in people's lives and calling people sinners left and right. Maybe in the plot of the show, it's revealed they're actually a hypocrite. Hollywood and other, they love to do that to religious characters. I just want to ask Christians, does that annoy you when you see that? Because if that annoys you when you see that, you have to recognize that when you are prying into matters in other brethren's lives, you are perpetuating that stereotype. You are pushing that forward. Jesus says in Luke 17 and verse 1, it's impossible that no offenses should come, but woe to him through whom they come. It would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea than that he should offend one of these little ones. What if you take this point where you just try to destroy someone and you end up being more of an instigator into them falling away from the faith? Maybe there was nothing that they did wrong in the first place, but the situation, now again, I'm not saying that you would be responsible for them losing their soul. That would still be upon them, but you would have a hand in it to some degree if what you're doing is not called for and is illegitimate, as Terry's been talking about. It's important for us to know that the seriousness of this is that we stand to be the stumbling block for others the more we try to do things like this. Again, we're not talking about legitimately, in a true, genuine concern. Brother, I'm worried about you. I'm seeing this. Maybe there's something. And that's another thing to point out. I think we've touched on that already, but I'm not sure. We want to assume the best in every situation. So when we approach someone, we want to give them 100%. You know what? I may have this wrong. And if I don't have this wrong, you let me know. And when we approach them in that Matthew 18 way, we do it in a loving way. We don't call them out. We tell them, hey, I saw this. I'm concerned about it. What's the situation? And we do not, of course, we do not go to others about that. And I think, again, just about all of us can think about moments in our lives that approximates this. So we're not talking about some hypothetical that just never happens. This is a real thing. And we as Christians have to stand up to this to recognize that, hey, we have the world watching us, not just the world. The Ephesian letter seems to indicate that all of existence is watching the church. that the powers and the principalities, even in the heavenly places, are watching us. And so we're called to be the example that Jesus called us to be. And I think it's important that we note that the seriousness of this is, hey, I could be a stumbling block. And I'm sure we could comment too on the fact that John talks about, hey, you hate your brother, you're a murderer. Very, very clear and simple stuff that we need to keep in mind.
Before we move on to the next question, Chris, I just want to say in relation to these two questions here, every sin is as bad as every other sin because all sin is a violation of God's will. Not all sins are equally consequential. You can't apologize to someone for murdering that person, but you can apologize to somebody for gossiping about them, for doing whatever you have done that would tend to destroy their reputation or their character in the eyes of others. And so even John called hate, if you hate your brother, you're a murderer, because that's what hatred will ultimately lead to if it's not checked. And so each sin is equally as bad as each and every other sin. James talks about that. If you violate God's point in one matter, you've violated the same law as if you violated them all. And so we need to keep that in mind. Sin is sin, and we need to try to avoid it at all costs.
All right, excellent points. And there's a lot that could be said about all these questions. So let's go ahead and bring up the next one, and because they all tie in together really well. And simply put, when is something none of my business? I was thinking about an encounter that Jesus had, and I believe it's John chapter 8. Let me turn over there for just a moment, because you find where, was sin committed by this woman that was caught in adultery? Yeah, yeah, there was sin there. But I'm just going to read through it just a little bit so you can kind of see the real lesson that Jesus wants to teach here. When you find a group of people in a town wanting to drag somebody out and accuse them for their sin, it says in chapter 8, and this is in the book of John, chapter 8, and verse 3 and following. Actually, let's pick up the verse 2. Now, early in the morning, he came again into the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. And then the scribes and Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now, Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what do you say? Now, we know that people often came to Christ to trip him up with his words, and they would use the law, they would use a scenario, and they would put out hypotheticals and all. But here's a real life situation that you think, yeah, it's sin. It needs to be addressed. We're not soft coding that. This woman was caught in adultery. There's no denying that. But the truth of the matter is, here's somebody in sin that I don't know how it all came to be, but I know that they're using this person not to help her in her situation, not to rebuke her, to correct her, but to test our Lord Jesus Christ. But anyway, get to the point here. He says in verse 6, this they said, testing him that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger as though he did not hear. Of course, I love that. Sometimes you just have to ignore the foolishness of men. And people say, well, what is he right? And all that. That's not addressed here. The emphasis is that he was acting like he did not hear, because he was treating, even though it was a serious situation, he saw that they weren't treating it in the seriousness nature in which it needed to be treated in the proper way. So when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, he who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. And then again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. Then those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest even to the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. Now here's one of the great important parts, and the great lesson that we can learn is, what is our purpose of pointing out someone's sin? What are we going to do about it? When Jesus raised himself up, he saw no one but the woman. He said to her, Woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? Obviously, they had something valid to complain about, right? but they addressed this sinful situation even in a busybody type manner. It was all wrong from beginning to end. But she said, "No one, Lord." And so Jesus said to her, "Well, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." Now, in all this, I believe there's rebuke, there's correction. Even Jesus said, "Go and sin no more." He addressed it as sin. Again, he did not ignore the consequences of this sin. But as verse 12 continues to say, Jesus spoke to them again, saying, "I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life." So when we are practicing this meddling, busybody attitude, are we walking in the light or are we walking in darkness? Is our goal to correct sin and forgive sin and help someone out of that sin? Or is our goal to point the finger back at a busybody? Or is our goal as a busybody to point the finger at someone who has sinned just to accuse them? Are we looking to accuse or correct? Are we looking to judge or are we looking to forgive? I met someone years ago who said, I've got a little problem. I talk about people. People treat being a busybody almost like it's just one of those little things. Like the of all the list of sins, well, that's my little vice there. I'm an impatient person. We often forgive that and be like, oh, that's just the way they are. You just have to know them. And we actually excuse it a lot of times because we see it practiced and behave even among Christians. And I don't think Stephen was too far off. Why does Hollywood portray the busybody as being the religious person in the community? Why is it a Mrs. Kravitz or Mrs. Olsen, on Little House on the Prairie or Bewitched or whatever those old shows are that, people just were so irritated at these people that, generally had good lives and had to be humbled a lot of times because they were sticking their nose in other people's business. I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying that's the way Hollywood sees the church a lot of times. So we do have to be careful because we are to judge with righteous judgment. But it doesn't mean we go sticking our nose in every situation that's out there. So you see, it's not a small thing. It's like going into church. You can compliment somebody. This happens every once in a while. You can say, "Oh, brother so and so was here today, and we're real proud of him. He showed a lot of faith today." And then it's easy for someone to stand up, "Yeah, but he wasn't here during the gospel meeting. Yeah, but he wasn't here, 5 weeks ago. Let's go back and read the attendance and let's see who was here and who wasn't." What is our attitude and our motivation behind those things? Stephen, what are some of your thoughts?
Well, just to quickly comment on the discernment part of what you said, which I appreciate you bringing that up because on the one hand, I recognize that when I have done something wrong, especially on a public level, but even on a private level, when I'm struggling with something, I need to go to my brethren. I need to seek out help because the Bible tells me to. And then I recognize that at that point, the more open I can be about my sin, the more helpful that will be for me to be able to resolve it. I'm not saying we have to go into livid details or something to that effect, but there is something true to, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. We're looking for that healing. And we tell people when they come forward as members, don't expect you to just come forward and say, "Oh, I did some wrong things," and then get a bunch of hugs and then just everything be okay. If it's something ongoing, you need help and you need to let your brethren help you. Now, flip yourself on the other side of that. There's something that the elders are dealing with another member that's not you, not in your family. And the elders have decided because of this situation that they're going to work with this brother or sister. Maybe there's not a whole lot of details that are coming out about that at this moment. Well, as a member, I have to be satisfied with that. I have to submit to my elders in that moment and recognize and trust that they have the best interests in the health of the congregation and my spiritual health in dealing with this issue. And so it does no good for me to push and pry and prod into that matter because they've told me they're working on it. Now, if something else comes up later on that is on a public nature, then we deal with it on that level at that point. But it's very important that we discern that, hey, this is not my bag. This is not my place. And you could argue too as well that maybe the more restraint you use there, maybe it is something, maybe they're struggling with something you struggle with. And the elders call upon you and say, hey, this brother's dealing with this. Like, can you help him out? Can you be an accountable, with him, an accountable buddy to him, I guess you'd say. The discernment is so key here, because if we lose that discernment, well, we run the risk of a lot of problems there. I know that everything I just said is much more difficult in a situation without elders, but even then, we have to navigate these waters very carefully and remember that we're here to help our brother out. We're not here to take them down or destroy them for something they did.
I would add something to that. In Proverbs chapter 26, verse 17, it says, he who passes by and meddles in a quarrel not his own is like one who takes a dog by the ears. In other words, the end result is not going to be good for you. You take a dog by the ears, he's going to bite you. If you're going to meddle in somebody else's quarrel, it's not your own, it's going to bite you. So be very careful. When it's something none of my business, when it's not my own, it's not something that involves me. Second of all, if it's not hurtful to other people around and needs to be stopped, then it's not my business. If it is going to hurt people around me, maybe I need to step in and say, hey, I love you, brother or sister, whichever the case may be. But we need to consider what damage this thing is doing. So it may be most of the time things that other people are doing is none of your business, but sometimes it becomes everybody's business because they're endangering other people. Children are involved, others are being hurt. And so somebody needs to step in and say something that steers them in the right direction. So most of the time things are not our business, but if it hurts other people and other people's lives are endangered, it becomes your business. You may say somebody drinking and driving is none of your business. Yes, that becomes everybody's business. If they want to drink on their own, that's between them and God. And I can tell you right off the bat that God is not pleased. But that's going to be on your end, and you're going to have to handle that. But when something is none of my business, it does not involve me, and it's not going to be hurtful to other people. That's none of my business then. So keep those points in mind. Don't grab a dog by its ears or you'll get bit.
Got any thoughts on that, Bob?
I just want to say that if it does not involve me, either directly or indirectly, materially or spiritually, it's none of my business. Sin in the church involves me. Individual sins of my fellow brethren involves me, because we are given responsibilities in those matters. But if it's not sin, if it's a matter of personal judgment, as Terry pointed out, if it's something that they choose to do in their home where there's no influence on other people, that's one thing. But if people are doing things in public that is leading someone else astray, encouraging someone else to sin, then that is my business. That's the business, as Terry pointed out, of all of us. And we need to be concerned about one another when we see one another actually sinning. But as far as suspecting something and acting on those suspicions, I just don't believe that's what we need to be doing.
I think a lot of these questions we can kind of wrap up at this point because of the fact that there's only so much that we can say. The truth of the matter is we answered it with the first question. Because what does God want us to do? How does he want us to behave? There you get on Facebook and sometimes you can learn a lot about people by what they post. And if they want to post things about themselves, then that's their business. You can let somebody know as much or as little about your life as you want. That's up to you. It's not up to me. We have a bit of a neighborhood watch where I live. We kind of watch out for each other. Somebody's in need of something, we're there with information. If somebody has trouble with a break-in or something like that in the neighborhood, we inform each other, kind of let each other know what goes on. If there's a speeder on the street, sometimes we need to know that. We have children around here. We need to know what to watch out for. We need to watch out for that particular car that races through the neighborhood every day. And maybe at some point the authorities need to get involved. But I don't need to know that a guy's grass is too tall. I don't need to know, who that is in the dark hoodie walking down the street. I don't need to be suspicious about everything and every little thing that goes on in the world around me. Um, I need to know just to kind of when to mind my own business and say, you know what? If a problem ensues of things, then it will. Then we deal with it when it happens. We're not the police to, try a crime before it's committed. You might say we watch for telltale signs and we're careful. And we watch out for those things in our lives and we watch out for one another, as we said just a few moments ago. Some things are between the individual and God. But I think, Stephen, as you pointed out a few moments ago, we need to let our brethren know. If you want people to know your business because you want to be accountable to them, give them your phone number, give them your email address, answer your phone when they call, let them know how you're doing, let them know your struggles. These things are hard to sometimes admit, but the scriptures say to confess your sins to one another. James chapter 5. And if we confess, we're going to find that we find great healing, not only physically, but emotionally, and most importantly, spiritually. And that's what we're really looking for. If you are looking out for your brother's spiritual well-being, then you'll know how much is too much, when to back off, when to approach, when to rebuke, and of course, in all things, how to show love. Any last thoughts before we close out our program this evening?
I think we pretty much said it all.
Yeah. I believe so as well. So we're here to help each other with their faith. And for you as the listening audience, if we can help you with your faith, I often like to tell people, look, you don't have to tell me everything that's going on in your life. Just let us know you're having a struggle. That's enough for us to at least pray for you, to study with you about some things. And as we build trust and a relationship with each other, just know that the people you put your trust in will become genuine in their relationship with you, and they're watching out for your good. And a time will come when you feel more comfortable sharing with them things about your life. So we're not here to pry. The church is not here to pry. And so we don't want to draw the line either. God sees everything. He knows what your needs are, and he wants you to know that you need to know what your needs are. And one of the ways that he will help you in this life is by turning to his people. We are the tools that God uses in this life to carry out a lot of his work. He doesn't do everything by waving the magic miracle finger. He does it by using his servants. And that's what we're striving to be. So let us show our love to you. Use your discretion and in what you want to share. Well, guys, good to be with you tonight. Hope that we can study again tomorrow. Well, I don't know exactly what our lineup is, but we have a lot of good questions. And we will be back here on Answering Religious Error every Wednesday for our live Bible Q&A. We answer a series of questions submitted by you, the listener. So we hope that you'll join us every Wednesday at 12 Eastern Standard Time. And if you have questions, just email us at questions@answeringreligiouserror.com. You can also submit questions as we are watching the program on our Facebook page. But also remember, if you're watching a video that is shared by someone else, For instance, if you go to my personal page and watch this program there, we may not always see your messages. So if you have something to say, let us know by writing on facebook.com /answering religious error. And the same on our YouTube channel. We get the messages there as well. But we love it when you share. We love it when you like our pages. We love to hear from you because that feedback helps us in our studies of God's Word so that we can kind of get an idea. What do our brethren need? What do those out there that maybe are in sin need? What are your concerns? What are your struggles? If you want to share that with us, please do. We'll take your personal matters privately and we'll study them privately. And if you want anything said publicly here on this program, you're welcome to do so as well. And you'll know that many people will be praying for you. There's some other programs that are going on throughout the week. Remember, Thursday evening, there's a program called Older Women Likewise. And so if you'll tune in here on Facebook and look up Older Women Likewise, Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you'll hear some fine lessons by some Christian women. For women by women is what we like to say. And you'll hear the perspective of faithful ladies in the Lord and about Bible things, how to live their lives, their relationships in this life, and so on. We also, of course, Brother Bob Myhan, as you saw a few moments ago, offers a program every Monday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time called Bob's Bible Basics. Again, you can find that on the YouTube, I think YouTube, but I know it's on Facebook for sure. It's a Facebook live program, and he takes us through various lessons of the Bible. Last night, he talked to us about the Ethiopian eunuch and the work that Philip did. So I want to thank Bob for his efforts there. There's opportunities to hear the gospel every single day of the week. And if there's a particular subject that you can think of, let us know. We might actually have a video about it that we can point you to in our archives on our YouTube channel. Well, we thank you for joining us tonight. We hope to see you tomorrow on the live Bible Q&A. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time right here on Answering Religious Error.